All right, well, let's do a little review. We're talking about trigonometry again today. So, review this idea. All right, coming down the side. What does the S stand for? Sine. Okay. And what does the O and the H stand for? Opposite over hypotenuse. So there's the sine function. All right, someone else do the next one. What's the cos stand for? Cosine. Okay. And what's A and H, Jalon? Oh. All right. Who can remind me? What's A and the H? Drew? Okay, adjacent over hypotenuse. And our last one, somebody else? T is tangent, abbreviated tan. And someone who was here on Friday, what's the O and the A? Jalon?
Opposite.
And?
Adjacent.
Adjacent. Okay. So let's draw a basic triangle here. And let's just choose this as our angle. Just really quick, if we have this as, say, 5, that is 3, and that is 4, and this is angle A. Really quick, what is the cosine of angle A? Think what we think about for cosine. Adjacent over hypotenuse. What's adjacent to A? What number? The 3 is adjacent. So cosine of A would be 3 over 5. Someone else, give me tangent of A. Think tangent, opposite over adjacent. What's opposite of A? 4 over 3. Okay. Now change it up a little bit. Now go up here to B. Let's do cosine of B. Now we want to look at B, and what do you want to think about cosine again? Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse. So what's adjacent to B? The 4. So now we have 4 over 5. So depending on what angle you have, depends on what measurement you're going to do, as a little review of all of our trig ratios. Okay? Now, moving on. As we're applying this now today to applications, we're going to talk about two things called the elevation and depression. If you take your arm, put it straight out in front of you. Go ahead. That is 0 degrees. Okay? Now, the key is it has to be straight as you start. Now, as you take your arm, go from your arm where it is to now aiming your arm at the baseboard in the front of the room. Where does your arm move? It moves down, right? The amount that your arm moved down from horizontal down to the baseboard, as your eyes follow it, that your eyes are lowering, your eyes are depressing, and so that would be called the angle of depression. In the same way, if your arm is straight out and you lift it up to the top of the edge of the ceiling, you elevated your arm, so that's the angle of elevation. So when your arm or your eyes raise, that's the angle of elevation from the horizontal, and when your arm depresses or your eyes depress, that's the angle of depression, looking down at something. So you need to understand what they're talking about in terms of their terminology. So, one of the most important parts of getting these problems correct is drawing them correctly. So here we have our first situation. You live 8.5 miles away from a tower. Assume the earth is flat. From your home, you can see a plane directly above the tower. So let's draw this. Here you are. Okay? Here's this tower. And what's above the tower? A plane. Okay, yada yada. Here's my plane. All right, so we have a distance right here. How much is that distance? 8.5. And that's in miles. The angle of elevation from where we are to the plane is 26 degrees. So from the horizontal up to the plane. So that's your angle of elevation. So let's fill that in with 26.7 degrees. And so the question is, what is the altitude of the plane? Do you guys know what variable typically is altitude?
A.
You ever heard of that H is altitude?
Yeah,
For height. So H typically stands for altitude. So now we have our triangle. Obviously this corner one right here is a right angle. So we've got that 26.7 as a degree measurement. We've got the 8.5 and we've got the H. So what trig function relates this angle to H and 8.5? Sine, cosine, or tangent? Well, let's first of all consider, compared to the angle, what is the H? What word? That's opposite. Okay, it's opposite the angle. What is the 8.5? That's adjacent. So what trig function uses opposite and adjacent? Okay, if you're not sure, write SOHCAHTOA down the side. SOHCAHTOA, therefore, it's going to be the tangent of 26.7 equals what over what? Opposite over adjacent. So H over 8.5. Now take your calculators. Let's crunch this out. Make sure your calculator, if it's not in the right mode, make sure it's in your degree mode. So let's find the tangent of 26.7. 0.502947 equals H over 8.5. How do I get rid of dividing by an 8.5? Multiply. So 8.5 times 502,947. Why am I keeping so many decimals?
make sure it's accurate.
Yeah. So I'm going to multiply times 8.5 on my calculator. That gives me 4.27505 equals H. So now we need to answer the question. What is the altitude of the plane? What are we going to say? Okay, I like the fact you said miles. How do we know how to be accurate here? It doesn't say. It doesn't say round to the nearest hundredth, tenth, thousandth unit. What accuracy did they give us in the problem? Tenths. So if they gave you tenths and they don't respond as to how accurate to be, John, you respond back in tenths. So in tenths, how many miles do we have? 4.3. Now, who has recently flown on a plane? Okay? Do you remember how high the plane was? Do anybody remember when they fly how high it says the planes are flying?
1,000 feet, 1,500 feet.
We were like, it wasn't like a normal plane, it was like a jet plane.
Okay? So those are flying a little bit lower than the commercial ones, but still much higher than the little Cessna, 6-seaters. Well, let's multiply this out. Take your 4.27 and multiply by the feet per mile. How many feet per mile? That's a number we should know.
1652.
Feet per mile. You're thinking yards. Anybody know? 5,280. So how high is this plane? It's flying at about 22,000 feet. For a jet or an airliner, that's about normal. They fly between 20 and 30,000 feet typically. So you're talking a normal standard passenger airliner. Okay, so that's at a 22,000 feet high. The picture is going to be one of the most important parts of understanding your problem. Okay, questions there? Flip her over. Get to draw a submarine. A submarine travels 5.4 miles diving at an angle of 9 degrees. How deep is the submarine beneath the surface of the water? Here's Luke and Josh with their fishing poles. And they're fishing. Oblivious to the fact that there's a submarine in play. All right, so what is this submarine doing? Here's our sub. Doesn't have like a big sail and a periscope, you know. What's our submarine doing?
Diving.
It's diving. Where is it diving?
Angle of 90 degrees.
Little do Luke and Josh know that the submarine all right, here's our submarine. It's dived 9 degrees. So where do I put the 9 degrees? Right in here. Where's my right angle? Up here. So now here's the question. The 5.4, does that go on the water or the diagonal?
On the water.
On the water. Why?
Because it's traveling 5 miles.
Is the submarine traveling across the surface? Where is it traveling? On which line?
It's traveling.
Is it traveling on the diagonal?
Yes.
So is that traveling distance? So you have to read carefully as to what you're thinking. So this is the 5.4. How deep is the submarine beneath the surface of the water? I want the vertical. So deep. All right, so compared to my angle, Ryan and James, compared to my angle, what word is the D? Is it hypotenuse, adjacent, or opposite? Would you know what adjacent means? Next to. Is it next to? Is this D next to that angle? No. So that's opposite. Adjacent means next to. So let's just write opposite over here. This long 5.4, is that the adjacent or the hypotenuse? Yeah, that's the hypotenuse because it's across from the 90 degrees. So the water, that's the adjacent. In this case, do we care about the adjacent? No. All right, what function uses opposite and hypotenuse? Which of the 3 trig functions? Sine does. Okay. So sine of an angle equals opposite over hypotenuse. Who can put my numbers in for me? Luke, go ahead.
The angle is 9 degrees.
So sine of 9 degrees equals?
D over 5.4.
All right. Let's crunch that out. The sine of 9. 0.1564. How am I going to solve this, Brett or Abby? How would I solve it now? Okay, so multiply by 5.4. 0.8447 equals D. So what's my answer?
You gotta multiply it.
It just says how deep is it? Do they ask for feet or fathoms or anything like that? No? So what are we going to say? 0.8 miles down. Do you see how the picture is crucial? You've got to draw a picture here. The picture is absolutely crucial. Look at our last one. A pilot is flying a plane 23,500 feet above the ground. He begins a 4-degree descent to an airport runway. How far away is the airplane from the start of the runway? But then what do we put in parentheses? In ground distance. So let's draw that. Here we have our plane. Okay. he begins a descent. What's down here?
The runway.
The runway. So here it is. Okay? 4 degrees. There's your right angle. What else do we know? I have 23,500 and I have a question mark.
The height is 23,000.
All right, so let's put that 23,500 over here. 23,500. What am I asked to find? How far away is the airplane from the start of the runway in ground distance? Do I want to find the diagonal or the horizontal? What does ground distance mean? If the pilot dropped a rock out, assuming it didn't, hit something, it would hit the ground, right? It would fall straight down if the pilot happened to be hovering. Okay? That distance from where that rock dropped to where he touches down is called the what? Ground distance. Well, that distance there is the same as what distance? The top distance up in the air. So this up top could be called the ground distance. Okay, it's the same thing for both. You just have to realize that that triangle is actually a rectangle cut in half. So let's think of some words here. We have our angle, 4 degrees. Back row, Haley, all the way over to John. 4 degrees compared to 23,500. What word is the 23,500, somebody? That's opposite, okay. Ground distance, what word is that? That's the adjacent, because it's next to. Remember, the diagonal is always called your what? Your hypotenuse. All right, so what function is it going to use? Opposite and adjacent. What do you think? Tangent. Yeah, TOA. Tangent. Tangent equals opposite over adjacent. So the tangent of 4 degrees equals 23,500 divided by the ground distance. I'll call it GD.
Mr. McDonell, why is that the flip of the triangle just for?
It's just so you can see ground distance is on the ground, right? But as we draw our triangle, it's hard to draw the triangle with the plane starting up there. I was just trying to help you understand what ground distance means, that word means. All right, who's got the tangent of 4? .0699 equals 23,500 divided by ground distance. How do I solve for ground distance here? It's on the bottom. Any thoughts? We did a couple like this on Friday. How did we get rid of anything on the bottom? What do we do with it? The last one, wasn't there a number on the bottom? How did we get rid of this 5.4? We multiplied it up. So multiply up. 0.0699 times ground distance equals 23,500. Now the ground distance is on the up. Just like over here we multiplied by 5.4, here we multiplied by ground distance. So now how do I solve for ground distance? What do you think, Luke? Divide. Yeah, just divide. So divide 23,000 by 0.0699. So 23,500 divided by 336,194. So the controller at the tower says, it looks like you have 336,194 to go. What? How can you go that far? What kind of units are we in right now? Feet. Do we want to be in feet, you think? No.
Miles.
So what are we going to divide that by? 5280. If you don't know that number, write it down. So divide by 5280. This is in feet. So now I get the ground distance. 63.7 miles. 63.7. Does that seem more like it? How far out do you think planes start their landing?
60
About 60 miles out. So effectively, when that plane gets to Rockford, he's starting his descent almost into Chicago, because he doesn't want to do any kind of a dive that would make you feel like he's diving. He just wants to kind of
And they're doing,
ease down so you don't notice.
they're doing like 400 miles an hour.
Yeah.
So,
So he's going to do that very, very quickly. That's only going to take him 15 minutes. So from your perspective, it's a very, very gradual slope. So, John, you had a question?
what's in miles?
Miles per feet, 1 mile equals 5,280 feet. That would be a unit of measure I would expect you to know. Just 3 feet in a yard, that many feet in a mile. So, you know how in physics you've kind of memorized 9.8 meters per second squared is acceleration? Same idea. This is a number that you should know. Just in general, it's a good number just to have in your arsenal for common stuff.